how long it goes towards an actual hour, but I think calling it evolution half hour or evolution 15 minutes or evolution 45 minutes seems overly complicated. Yes, so we'll just generic hour. Behold our virtually unlegible patrons, but still, thank you everyone for keeping up the show and supporting it week after week, month after month. My heavens, I mean, that's I literally could not do this without you. So this is extremely important. As you know, I am plowing through Nathaniel Jeanson's book Traced from 2021. And it's been a fascinating thing to see how sparse the source citations are. Chapter after chapter, at least in the early stages of the book, are essentially little squibs and authority quotes and that drawn from generic histories and things of China and various other cultures, not technically, of which he's still got a pile up going. Hi, Barbara. Still got quite a pile up that yet to figure in. So the next couple of chapters that he slid continued in that mode, and but one item stuck out on page 128, which is about halfway through, regarding the Asian Y-chromosomal DNA C haplogroup. And he announced, quote, the timing of the separation, 1200s BC to 700s BC, matches almost exactly the time of the separation among the haplogroup O sublineages, O1A, O1B, O1B2, O2, unquote. And invites comparison with his color plates, 163 and 141, where all this is supposedly happening after 1300 BC. I'll show that in a moment. So those plates turned out for the C group, this little picture, and you'll notice again by the because the Bergstrom data pegs that little node at about 60,000 years ago. Not exactly 1300 BC, is it? And then his other chart, 141, which is, again, all cribbed from Bergstrom, which you can calibrate it as to those particular groupings that are in there, hand 4, hand 3, and so forth and so on, that he is listing in the 1300s and 1200s in his compression are around 30,000 years ago, according to the Bergstrom papers. Gee whiz, is there any way to find out whether or not that fits? Well, as Dan Stern Cardinale did with the Fu paper in one of his postings, and I've been doing for the last couple of weeks here, what if we have archaeological evidence for it? In other words, not taking existing DNA and merely retro-calculating when the mutation rate suggests they diverge, in which, of course, he could argue evolutionary assumptions, but actual remains from archaeological digs that, how are you going to ram that into a completely different chronological frame when all of this stuff is supposedly taking place after the flood? Why aren't we finding iron tools? Why aren't we finding a whole bunch of things? How can we be dealing with things from the Neolithic period? So what is there with C and O haplogroups? Well, that turned out to be quite interesting because first off, functionally, he doesn't cite a damn thing on it, and there's nothing in his technical literature. One little one that would be popping up is the Carmen paper that he's fiddled with, but he doesn't relate it to any of the stuff at the moment that connects up with material. All the papers that I'll be putting the linkage to are not in his reference bibliography. At Jeanson, at one point, he went on, it's as if something happened in Siberia, East Asia, that spurred a massive migration event to the far reaches of the East Pacific. And then put in this kicker, together these results suggest that the sea migration occurred after the initial settling of Australia and Melanesia. Oh, gosh. Well, Australia is a safe bet because that took place around 40,000 years ago, although that one haplogroup apparently predates the Australian migration. So now we're in a little bit of trouble. So one of all the technical papers that Jeanson did not think to draw on this. Regarding one of the derived subgroups in that C cluster, Zhong from 2010 from Nature, which I'll be putting the link up to indicated, quote, the northward expansion of HGC in East Asia started 40,000 of years ago, KYA, along the coastline of mainland China, not back in post-Ararat, and reached Siberia B 15, about 15,000 years ago, and finally made its way to the Americas. More recently, Hallest 2021 paper, which of course was coming out around the same time that Jeanson was blithering his book, drew on additional data to push the C group back even farther to about 55,000 years ago. So all of this is corroborating the Bergstrom material from completely independent directions. Now, what about the fossils? There's some Upper Paleolithic orignations, European remains at Pastera Muiri, which I think is in the Balkans, and Goye Q116, which is they're both around 35,000 years old, according to standard archaeology. They have mitochondrial DNA and Y-chromosomal haplogroups, and that was studied in 2016 by works Jeanson has not cited, notably that Fu paper that he's definitely avoided, and one from 2016 by Hervella that I'll be putting the direct link into in the description. Now, the C1b haplogroup has turned up in prehistoric Russians from about 34,000 years ago. There's a 2014 paper by Orlando on that. In other words, long reading even Jenson's other book, 2017 one. And more recently, another that we would not expect him to have glommed onto because it came out in 2021, Hajinak, we look at that Goya Q116 data field and extracted some more DNA from that and found the even more basal C1a haplogroup among them, along with evidence of intermarriage and interbreeding with Neanderthals. So now we've got a most fascinating circumstance of what are Neanderthals figuring this? How can this be taking place in 1300 rather than 30,000 years ago? The chronology, of course, is an absolute mess, and it would be hilarious to see Jeanson try to write a book where he dives into the archaeological context of all of that. Ooh, I'm looking at my little chart. Sure, I'm going. Oh yeah, we're oozing down into the 3 bar level, but that should be kicking along okay. So, see the overall. There's not only in researching all of this, you've got multiple haplogroups. You have haplogroups from the Y-chromosomal DNA, and then there's also ones from mitochondrial DNA, which is kind of an independent track. Doesn't seem to be discussing that in Jenson's book, but I thought I would look anyway. So it's those deliver comparably old dates on the splits. There's a paper from 2010 by Durenko on the C and D haplogroups, and Dryomov from 2021, Science Marches On, which pushed the direct presence of the C4 group in that mitochondrial DNA back at least 12,000 BCE in Siberia, which is twice the age of the universe in Jenson's framework. Now, what about the O haplogroup, the one that is derived from the C and is taking place well after 1300 BCE in Jenson's cartoon? Jenson's new book definitely had to be aware of some of the data here because it was in that 2015 paper by Carmen, and I'm putting the link again into that one so that you can find that. That put the OM175 haplogroup originating between 31 and 51,000 years ago, and which makes it interesting that Jeanson didn't bring it up when he's discussing the O haplogroup, since it was one of the topics of the paper. Why is he avoiding all of this material? Apparently, from one thing I was glancing along, he drops some references to Carmen later on in the book. We'll find out exactly where those connect up and whether or not he's still misrepresenting or misinterpreting them. Anyway, more broadly, there's all of these little European haplotypes have started to be gathered into a big database, and going back 45,000 years in just Europe by Freeman 2020, which I'm putting the linking up to that. None of that's fitting into the big slosh box. Now, part 2 of the show. Dear old Jeffrey Tompkins in 2019 for a little article he stuck in at ICR, tried to show humans and chimps are not related by cherry picking some info from a 2020 paper by Thama Delac. And I'll be putting a link into both Tompkins and the paper, examining human and other primate saliva, which puts up the joke about, in my heading, about YEC genetics ain't worth spit. And of course, the high C making the O face, referring to the haplogroups. Tompkins noted that human saliva was more watery than the primate cousin, but did not mention how, regarding, quote, discovered salivary proteins in humans, we could identify counterparts in chimpanzee and gorilla saliva, unquote, meaning only its expression profile varied between humans and chimpanzees. So flat out, Tompkins is misrepresenting the technical work here. Frank Sherwin, more recently in 2021, for another ICR article, retread Tompkins's argument, but duly trimmed even that to highlight only the, quote, unique protein profiles, unquote, in humans. So there you're seeing the early stages of a daisy chain, as you've got Tompkins misrepresenting the paper in 2019, and then Sherwin riffing off of Tompkins rather than dealing with the original data himself. So we're starting to nudge ourselves away. Over the next few years, we'll find out whether anybody keeps banging this drum, because ICR is prone to a lot of repetition in this area, and especially since the regular scientist will be continuing to do research on the evolution of saliva genes and all the rest. And so there will be probably ample opportunity for them to misrepresent those papers too when they come along. Here's the image of the ape spit radically different from humans. There we go. And then here is a little screenshot there of the Thamaduk paper. And of course, we'll be having all the links in there so you can follow up on that as we go. This is relevant to human evolution issues and stuff, so it's grist to go into volume 2. The rocks were there, the human evolution section. It's going to have a hell of a lot of material in it. Jackson will be doing the main text material on that, and then I'll have my backlog of stuff and historical background of creationists drithering on the subject to put in, and I'm sure we'll end up with quite a few little interesting little info boxes down the road there. So it's a funky little subject to go into. So that brings us up pretty much to speed on that matter. There was a new paper on the origin of the ATP synthase that Nick Matsky called attention to just today, and I was downloading the information on that stuff. It's not yet been published, but it is up on archive.org. And anybody who follows me on Twitter will have seen me, because I decided to retweet the thing because it was clearly drawing on. Oh, let me go get the info on it. I'll give you a little heads up on it. Boom. Basically, they were doing a big deep dive on all the new data that has come along from the Asgard archaeals and alpha protobacterials and the like. And so they argue that the ATP synthase evolution supports the scenarios on eukaryotic origins from the Asgard archaea host and an alpha protobacterial symbiont. So we've got an endosymbiotic event, which has been long kind of the suspicion that eukaryotes are developing as an endosymbiotic phenomenon, and this new paper is clarifying that. And once it hits, I'll have to find out exactly which journal and so forth, and so that gets through. But anyway, that pre-publication was enough to interest Nick Matsky, and so I was certainly fascinated to take a look at it itself. I'm like a kid in a candy store with all of this technical literature, because with relatively little difficulty, most of the time, able to get the original means that anybody simply find out subject matter so they become more informed on the topic. Assembling a line of full to draw his creation. I'm bringing this stuff up. All way readily available, and that's why I would recommend anybody that wants to dive into the creation of pummeling field, take that approach. It's a matter of where the firewall information, and also by weeding off of just a secondary account. I mean, you can start. By the way, I found out about O and C haplogroups. I found out Wikipedia, but I stopped at looking up sources, finding out additional material, and cross-checking with all of that stuff. You can also up the ante in requiring that anybody in the creation field interact with them. You either have to get on the web and start paying these specifics. For a superficial manner. If you're looking like a Cantobian, who just saying claptrap over and over again, you're not going to get too far. Well, it's getting into a little messy level on here. So I think I will probably be curtailing this at only about a quarter of an hour. But as I said, when I get the linkages up, we'll have for your entertainment and delight. There's going to be more of the haplogroup information as I plow through the rest of the book, because he's effectively slobbing across the entire human species and looking at these things which he gleaned from the Bergstrom. But because he is gleaning it from the Bergstrom, and I can get cross data on the chronology involved, and then look up the individual data fields to find out what there is, and then cross-check against his bibliography to find out what he leaves out, it's looking like what I've been doing for the last couple of weeks. Hi, sentient beings. Hi, Purple. It looks like that this process of him just putting up cutesy poop charts and slamming in his little numbers as he compresses the data field down. Remember, he's not inventing the data. And he isn't doing the data himself, by the way. He's taking an existing data field from the Bergstrom paper and simply going and shrinking it down so that he has it starting post-flood. And that inevitably is going to get him into trouble as we find more and more examples of these haplotypes from archaeological digs belonging to the Stone Age long before the flood era, even by their own scenarios. So it's a mess. And I don't ever anticipate Jeanson ever getting to the point where he's going to be doing a field stepping even farther outside of his wheelhouse to do an analysis of the archaeological digs and to try to somehow argue, to come up with some kind of a more serious argument for how peoples have moved around, given particularly the fact that the data field is moving so much. There's so much new research going on, and they're cataloging things in ways that it's going to be a hard course for him to do. Everyone remember to do the bad carpenter and hit the thumb. YouTube doesn't care which one. Yes, well, everybody like the video, recommend it. If you can become a patron, please do so. If you do not have paralogs for the fiction department, or Rocks Are There, or Evolution Slam Dunk, please, I'm happy and delighted if you acquire them. And consider, if you've got some money to spare, getting copies and donating to your local. Whoops, James is having connection issues. We're starting to have some little bit of trouble on there. So anyway, all the links to all the books, by the way, are always in the video. So every single week. So we all safe wherever you are. Don't continue with